Newsflash! Andy Bannister is going to tell us how he knows Christianity is right. Stay tuned. Yeah, sure he is. Our good pal Andy Bannister wonders how atheists know they're right, while not at all addressing how he personally knows that his Christian beliefs are true. And that's no surprise, of course, because Andy Bannister is a hypocrite, hiding in his religious safe space, pretending to be making videos for and about atheists, while actually just making them for the comfort and security of the religiously gullible. What else is new? So let's see what Andy has to say, shall we?
How do you know if what you believe most passionately is true?
That's a good question. I predict Andy won't have a good answer. Of course, this is something I ask the religious all the time. How do you know that the things you have faith in are actually true in the real world? After all, just because you believe something, no matter how passionately you believe it, that doesn't mean that it's actually so. And we can look at all kinds of crazy people out there standing on soapboxes on street corners, screaming about the end of the world that just never seems to come. We can look at impassioned speeches online about the earth being flat that are simply wrong and demonstrably so. Just because you really want something to be true, just because you are personally convinced that it's true, that doesn't guarantee that your beliefs make any sense or are factually correct in the actual world we all share. But sure, Andy, go ahead and enlighten us.
It's a good question whether you're a Christian watching this, or a Muslim, or a believer in some other faith, or an atheist. How do you know if what you believe is true?
Well, I know, or at least I have good reason to think that what I accept is true by being able to step back and dispassionately examine my positions from an objective standpoint. And of course, I hold no positions whatsoever that I insist must be true for all time, no matter what. I go where the evidence leads. If new evidence shows that what I previously accepted is wrong, then I change what I accept to follow the new paradigm, because reality is the ultimate arbiter of what I ought to allow into my head. I'm sure Andy here has something else in mind, though.
One way you can know, or one way you can put what you believe to the test, is by exposing your deeply held beliefs to critique and the best challenge from the other side. And that's increasingly hard to do in our internet-connected age, because far from expose us to a wide range of ideas, what the internet has become for many of us is an echo chamber.
Well, yes and no. So let's look at this. Exposing what you believe to the other side for critique might be useful. But it might also be totally worthless if the other side is just operating off blind faith and wishful thinking. The only way for such a critique to be worthwhile is if it is based on evidence, logic, and reason. And we all know that's not likely if your opposition are fanatical and delusional. And Andy, talking about an echo chamber when your own comments are shut off, pot, kettle, black.
There was a piece of research done around the time of the last American election which looked at both Democrats and Republicans and their behavior online, and it discovered that Republican groups on places like Facebook only ever quoted opinions from writers sympathetic to them, and the same was true of Democrats.
Which is why we have such a ridiculous political ideological deadlock in this country, because we have two sides that are absolutely convinced that they, and only they, are right, and everyone else must, by definition, be wrong. It's almost like they're taking a page out of the religious playbook.
And the same happens in religious discussion. I know many Christians who only ever spend time talking to other Christians online. I know many atheists who spend all of their time just talking to fellow atheists and quoting atheist writers. They're living in an echo chamber. They're not putting their beliefs to the test.
While some of that might be true, far more atheists are out there listening to religious apologetics and proving just how insane they are, making videos specifically for the religious, while people like Andy here are just making videos for the already converted, trying to make the crazy things they believe seem more reasonable. Andy certainly isn't out there trying to convert the non-religious. He isn't debating them. He isn't even responding to them. He's just hiding, and that's very telling.
I was reminded of this recently when I was in Canada doing a university event, doing a dialogue, a discussion with an atheist friend. We do these university events from time to time in front of hundreds of students. And every time we dialogued before, my atheist friend would use this line at some point in the discussion. He'd say, "Andy, next time we do one of these university events, wouldn't it be fun if we switched places? I'll take the Christian side, you take the atheist side, and we can argue for the other camp. Wouldn't that be interesting?"
Not really. I mean, I've seen this kind of thing done before, but since neither side of the switch perspective experiment has any interest or commitment to their newly assigned position, it becomes little more than a farce. Two people playing a game where, at best, they're just parroting claims they've seen from the other side, and at worst, they're actively trying to sabotage the discussion because they want their original side to win. I have yet to see this done convincingly.
And the first 2 or 3 times that he did this, I never quite knew how to respond. I hadn't fully figured out my response. But the last time he did this, a few months ago, this thought occurred to me. I looked across the stage at him and I said, "That's a great idea, Chris. Yes, we should think about that." And if I was going to do that, I would go over to the section of my library in my study and I'd pull down a dozen or 20 or so atheist books, and I named a few of them, and I'd begin, formulating arguments based on these atheist writers.
I rather doubt it. Oh, he might have those books and he might have read them, but I doubt he's actually understood what was being said, because atheism, or at least skepticism, which is the basis for my atheism, isn't something you can really fake. You have to be committed to asking questions and wanting actual answers, something the religious simply don't want to do.
Now tell me, which Christian writers and thinkers and philosophers would you pull off your shelf? Which would be your go-to books to begin formulating the Christian case?
Now, while I do have a very large religious library, and I could pull a lot of different books off of it from a lot of different religions, but wouldn't the only book you'd really need to argue for Christianity be the Bible? I mean, I think I've got a dozen different translations along with a handful of commentaries. But all Christian arguments are supposed to come from the Bible anyhow, aren't they?
He looks at me and he said, well, I haven't sort of done any of that reading. And it was interesting. Immediately, the audience kind of sort of turned and began sort of laughing, because it exposed that really what he was doing, with all due respect to my friend, was a rhetorical game.
Which is why I really doubt that any of this ever happened, or that Andy has any atheist friends in the first place. Because I know a lot of atheists that debate religion, and they have all, without exception, read a huge amount of theology. In fact, they tend to be much better read than their religious counterparts. Maybe Andy just needs a much better debate partner. Or maybe, just maybe, he just made it all up.
And it showed that he hadn't really, despite all these dialogues we'd done, really taken the time to think through the Christian position.
I have. Debate me, Andy. But of course, there's no need whatsoever to debate the Christian position at all, because Christians, and indeed all theists of all stripes, really fail before they even get to their own particular theological belief system. I don't have to debate the Christian position, or the Muslim position, or the Hindu position, because they've all failed to examine their own positions from a rational, critical, and skeptical viewpoint. If they can't do that, then they've failed to even get to the starting gate.
What are the Christian writers and thinkers that you've engaged with to really challenge your thinking so that you're not misrepresenting or responding to a caricature of the Christian faith?
Yeah, somehow I doubt Andy here has talked to any of the writers of his quote-unquote atheist library personally. He hasn't engaged with anyone. Heck, he won't even allow people to comment on his videos.
Unless you've put your beliefs to the test and exposed yourself to what others think, how can you know how seriously you believe what you say you do?
Good question, Andy. Again, closed comments on your videos. Nobody can tell you where you're wrong. You only see the things that you want to see, and you only expose yourself to the ideas that you choose to expose yourself to. And clearly from these videos that you make, you haven't exposed yourself to many actual ideas critical of your beliefs.
And one of the reasons I'm a Christian and believe that Christianity is true is I've seen it put to the test time and time and time again and stand up in the marketplace of ideas.
Citation needed. When has this happened? Because as far as I'm concerned, Christianity, and indeed all religion, fails the very first test of credibility, that of needing to have objectively verifiable evidence for its claims. So long as you need faith, you have indeed failed to be rational.
As it has done from the very beginning.
What? Fail? Because even from the very beginning, you had major detractors to the Christian message.
So if you're an atheist watching this and you've never really properly engaged with the best Christian arguments, the best Christian thinking, then I put it to you that one of three things is going on.
Well, as an atheist who used to be a Christian and one who has read a huge variety of Christian apologetic material, I suspect that none of these three things are going to be credible. But yeah, go ahead. I need a good laugh.
First is that perhaps you don't actually really believe your atheism. Yes, you make occasional atheist noises, but you don't actually really believe it.
There's nothing to believe, and if you don't know that, then you're even more dense than I thought. Atheism is the rejection of claims made by the religious for lack of objective support. It has no creeds, no beliefs, no positions that you must hold other than not believing in imaginary gods. But please, do go on. This is just riveting.
Second possibility is that you're lazy. You know there's thinking to be done. You know some of those atheist arguments and memes that you reshare on social media. They don't really make sense, but you just haven't bothered to do the thinking. Maybe you're lazy.
Says the guy operating on blind faith who refuses to acknowledge that he has no actual evidence for the things he believes. Because the religious are lazy. Absolutely, undeniably, and entirely lazy and hyper-emotional. They believe what makes them feel good, and so long as it does, they're not going to go out and see if the things they believe stand up to the damning light of reason. So that's 2 down, and laughably so. What's your third strike, Andy?
Well, the third possibility, maybe you're afraid of where this road goes if you start looking into the evidence and the arguments and reading actually grown-up thought and the best arguments on the other side, and you've just shut that door, you've locked it, you've bolted it, you've nail-gunned it shut.
Looking in the mirror again, huh, Andy? Because that's exactly what the overwhelming majority of theists I engage with do. The second you insist that they need evidence, or you point out that they have no evidence, or that they need some kind of rational reasoning, they run away. And the idea that atheists have to look at so-called grown-up arguments, and that's something I hear a lot these days, but where are they? Which arguments are grown up? Present some, because every time I ask, I get nothing but crickets, because I'll look at and critique anything. Give me something to look at, Andy. But of course he won't, because he has nothing. I think he and other theists are realizing just how ridiculous their own arguments really sound and are pretending that there's something better out there, but they just can't present it.
Because goodness knows what might happen to your atheism were you to actually put it to the test.
And goodness knows what might happen to your Christianity if you actually applied skeptical, rational, and critical evaluation techniques and refused to believe anything on emotional grounds, instead insisting that things had to stand up to intellectual rigor. But that's not going to happen, is it, Andy?
Those really are the only three options that I can see. You don't really believe it, you're lazy, or you're afraid. Which is it?
That's because you're hiding in your religious echo chamber and you're incapable of looking outside of it. And you notice all the way through these videos, Andy never said he tested his own beliefs to see if they were true. He's just accused atheists of being stupid, gullible, and blind. Says the stupid, gullible, and blind man hiding from the real world on YouTube. And that's really why all of these apologists operate the same way. He's not really addressing atheists. He's addressing the religious who are desperately seeking some validation that the things that they believe are true or reasonable or worth continuing to believe, when in reality they're not. But we can't have anyone telling them they're not. So comments aren't allowed and ratings are disabled to maintain the comforting illusion that they're on the side of the angels. If Andy actually cared about talking to atheists, if he actually cared about challenging his own faith on anything but his own terms, then he wouldn't be hiding, would he? He'd enable his comments and let atheists tell him exactly what's wrong with every single one of his videos. But that would require courage and a willingness to engage. And I guess we can't expect that from Andy Bannister, can we?